The sound was sharp, not the polite rustle of champagne flutes being set down, not the muted chatter of passengers fastening belts. This sound was violent, out of place, impossible to mistake. A hand meeting a face with such force it cracked like a gunshot in the confined luxury of first class. Gasps rippled down the aisle. Heads jerked toward row 2A in unison, the way a crowd turns at the screech of tires. Marcus Reed didn't flinch. His cheek still burned where the flight attendant's palm had struck, but his posture remained perfectly still, composed, even regal. He sat as though the slap had landed on another man in another life. His broad shoulders pressed against a leather seat, his suit jacket falling into sharp lines that framed his stillness like armor. The attendant's hand hovered midair, trembling, not from regret, but from adrenaline. Her face was taut, her mouth twisted into an expression somewhere between fury and satisfaction. Her uniform, navy pressed and flawless, looked like it had been stitched for authority. Yet in this moment, it was her anger, not her uniform, that commanded the attention of the cabin. "You don't belong here," she hissed, her voice slicing through the silence she herself had created. "Get up, move to economy. Now!" Every passenger within 3 rows froze, caught between disbelief and fascination. A woman in purple pressed her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. A businessman lowered his newspaper, his jaw hanging. Somewhere in the back of the cabin, the distinct chime of phone beginning to record joined the chorus of tension. Marcus remained silent. He could feel the eyes on him, dozens of them, some filled with pity, others with curiosity, and too many with relief that they were not the ones under fire. His silence wasn't weakness. It was control. It was the kind of calm he had honed over decades of walking into rooms where his presence was questioned before he spoke a word. The attendant's lips curled, emboldened by his stillness. She leaned closer, invading his space, her breath sharp with the tang of coffee. "I said move. Don't make me call security." Gasps echoed again, but this time they were accompanied by whispers. Did she just slap him? She can't do that, can she? Why isn't he saying anything? Phones lifted higher, red recording lights glowing like watchful eyes. The cabin wasn't private anymore. It was a stage, and every passenger had just become an unwilling juror. Marcus adjusted his cufflink. Slowly, deliberately, the faint glint of silver caught the overhead lights. His cheek still pulsed with heat, but he ignored it. To acknowledge the slap, to rise to her bait, would give her power. And power, Marcus knew, was the only currency that mattered at 35,000 feet or in the boardroom. "People like you don't sit up here." The attendant spat, her voice low enough to sting but loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. The phrase cracked through Marcus harder than the slap had. The words were old, familiar. He had heard them in banks where he held more collateral than the man behind the counter. He had heard them at hotels when his platinum card was treated like counterfeit. He had heard them at restaurants where his table was always unavailable. And now here, in first class, on a plane where his name, his signature, was embedded in the very contracts that kept it flying. The irony would have been laughable if the sting on his cheek didn't remind him of the venom behind her words. Marcus lifted his gaze at last. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. For the first time, she faltered, her hand lowering slightly, as though his silence had become a mirror she didn't like looking into. But before the moment could settle, she pressed the call button above his seat. A chime rang sharp and cold through the cabin. The sound of escalation. Whispers thickened like smoke. "She's really calling security?" He didn't even do anything. Wow, I can't believe this. The attendant straightened her blazer with a snap, her chin raised high. She was building her performance, framing him as the intruder. "Fraudulent passengers think they can sneak in all the time," she said loudly, deliberately projecting to the rows behind her. "But not on my watch." Gasps again. Disbelief swelled. A college student in row 4 raised his phone higher, voice shaking but firm. "I'm recording this. Everyone deserves to see what's happening." The power in the room shifted a fraction. The attendant's smirk wavered, but she doubled down, gesturing at Marcus with venom. "You're not fooling anyone. Show me a real ticket, or get out." Marcus' jaw tightened. Just for a second, his boarding pass was in her pocket. She had scanned herself, seconds before striking him. She knew it was real. Everyone would know it was real if she handed it back. But she didn't, because this wasn't about tickets. It never was. The hiss of the galley curtain pulling back cut through the tension. A tall security officer in Navy uniform strode down the aisle, his boots heavy, his gaze already narrowed at Marcus before hearing a word. His badge glinted, but his bias shone brighter. "What's the problem here?" he barked, voice rehearsed for authority. The attendant was ready, pointing at Marcus with righteous indignation. "This man doesn't belong here. Fake ticket, refusing to move." The officer folded his arms, towering over Marcus. His shadow fell across the seat like a threat. "Sir, you can either move to the back of the plane or you'll be removed entirely." A murmur of discomfort spread among passengers. A woman in red muttered, "But he hasn't done anything wrong." Her voice trembled, but her phone stayed steady, lens aimed at the officer's face. Marcus breathed slowly. His silence was heavy, calculated. He let it stretch, let it coil around the cabin, until even the officer shifted uneasily under the weight of it. He would not explain himself to people who had already written a verdict. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was low, calm, and carried an authority that made the hairs rise on the back of necks. "My boarding pass is in her pocket," he said evenly, the one she scanned herself. The attendant stiffened. The officer glanced at her, but she recovered quickly, scoffing. "We've seen the scam before. Flashy card, fake upgrade, hoping no one notices." Her words spilled like poison, coating the silence she feared. But Marcus didn't reply. He didn't need to. The passengers around him were already reacting. A businessman muttered, "That doesn't make sense." The college student whispered, "She's lying." A mother pulled her son closer, shielding him from the ugliness spilling into the air. The cabin had become a courtroom, and Marcus, without speaking more than one sentence, had already placed a flight attendant on trial. The officer leaned in closer, his jaw tight. "Last chance. Move, or I'll move you." Marcus tilted his head, eyes locking on the officers with unnerving calm. "Touch me," he said quietly, "and this flight will not leave the ground." The words rippled like thunder through the silence. Phones zoomed closer. A passenger gasped audibly. The cabin wasn't tense anymore. It was bracing. Something had shifted. The slap was no longer just an act of humiliation. It had become the spark for something much larger, something that was about to explode. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The officer's shadow loomed over Marcus like a storm cloud, thick with threat. His voice had been rehearsed for moments like this, loud, commanding, meant to cow compliance from drunks, agitators, or belligerent travelers. But Marcus Reed was none of those. Still, the cabin didn't know that. Not yet. The slap still lingered in the air, an echo etched into every passenger's memory. But what came next, the torn paper, the humiliation drawn out, would carve itself even deeper. The lead attendant appeared, striding down the aisle with the stiffness of someone used to extinguishing sparks of chaos. She was older, her uniform sharp, her hair pulled back, so tight it seemed to strain her expression. She exuded authority, and she was already convinced of Marcus's guilt before her heels even stopped at row 2A. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked briskly, though her tone carried the answer she wanted. The younger attendant spoke first, her voice rising so the cabin could hear. "Fraudulent boarding. He's refusing to comply." Gasps flickered through the rows. Phones tilted higher, recording every syllable. The hum of disbelief had become a constant drone, a quiet chorus undercutting the crew's authority. Marcus's silence remained steady. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't moved more than to adjust his cufflink, but the stillness was disarming, unsettling. His composure was a weapon, one the attendants didn't understand. The lead attendant extended her hand. "Your ticket, sir." Marcus's gaze lifted. "Calm level. You already have it." The younger attendant smirked triumphantly, pulling the folded boarding pass from her pocket like an exhibit in court. She held it up for her superior, as if proof of wrongdoing glowed in the paper fibers. "Watch this," she said. Her fingers gripped the edges. The sound was small, almost delicate. But in the silence of the cabin, it rang louder than the engines idling outside. Rip! She tore the boarding pass cleanly down the middle, letting the halves flutter to the carpet like discarded scraps. The reaction was instant. Gasps, shouts, disbelief that cracked open the hush. "You can't do that," a woman in a red scarf cried. Her phone zoomed in, recording the scraps against the dark blue carpet. "That's his ticket. I saw it." The college student's voice shook but carried. "That's destruction of property. That's evidence." The businessman in row 3 lowered his phone from his ear, turning to the aisle. "What the hell are you people doing? That's not procedure." The lead attendant didn't flinch. Her voice sharpened, slicing through the rising dissent. "That confirms it. A fake. No valid ticket exists for this seat. Sir, you'll need to move immediately." Marcus inhaled once. Slowly. His chest rose and stilled. He didn't argue. He didn't reach for proof, though proof had already been shredded into paper confetti at his feet. Because Marcus knew what they didn't. The cabin itself had become the record. Every lens raised, every whispered gasp, every shaken voice. This was evidence stronger than a strip of paper. The officer's patience cracked. He stepped forward, close enough for his polished leather shoes to touch the scraps. His voice thundered, authority fraying around the edges. "Stand up now, or I'll remove you myself." The cabin braced. Phones zoomed closer. Hearts pounded louder. The moment felt suspended, as if gravity itself was waiting for Marcus to respond. But Marcus didn't move. Instead, his mind, sharp, trained, unyielding, drifted backward, not to escape, but to remind himself who he was. Age 21. A recruiter leaned across a desk, smiling the kind of smile that cut deeper than scowls. "You're impressive, but you just don't fit our company's image. Maybe you'd be better suited elsewhere." Age 29. A banker flipped through his file, ignoring the collateral worth twice the loan. "It's not you, but clients like you can be high risk. Surely you understand." Age 37. A hotel manager held his platinum card like it was counterfeit. "Our system can't seem to verify this. Do you have another form of payment?" Every insult was a slap. Every dismissal a tear of paper. And everyone had forged a steel now visible in Marcus's gaze. Back in the cabin, he exhaled slow, measured. The officer's shadow leaned in closer, oppressive. The younger attendant sneered, emboldened by the threat. "You heard him," she snapped. "Last chance. Walk on your own or be dragged out." Gasps again. The woman in red scarf shook her head. Unbelievable. He's done nothing wrong. The college student raised his phone higher, his voice cracking but resolute. "Everyone's watching. Everyone's recording. You can't just do this." The businessman muttered, "This is going viral the second we land." But the crew didn't seem to hear. Or maybe they refused to. The lead attendant's face hardened. "Passengers are to remain seated," she barked, eyes darting to the growing dissent. "This is between us and him. Stay out of it." But the murmurs didn't quiet. They grew louder, more insistent. The hum of the crowd was shifting. The jury wasn't neutral anymore. Through it all, Marcus sat motionless. His silence was deliberate, carved from patience that felt like defiance. He finally lifted his gaze, fixing the officer with a stare that didn't blink. "Touch me," Marcus said evenly, his voice carrying down the aisle. "And this flight will not leave the ground." The words froze the air. They weren't shouted. They weren't emotional. But they landed like a verdict. Passengers gasped. Phones trembled. The officer's jaw clenched, but for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The young attendant scoffed, forcing bravado she didn't feel. "Empty threats," she spat. "You're just—" But she didn't finish, because the silence that followed Marcus's words wasn't emptiness. It was anticipation. Everyone felt it. Something was shifting, something seismic beneath the calm of his voice. For the first time, the attendants weren't in control. For the first time, the officer wasn't sure who he was threatening. And for the first time, the passengers weren't passive witnesses. They were jurors leaning forward, waiting for judgment. The scraps of Marcus's boarding pass still lay scattered at his feet, white against dark blue, recorded from every angle. But what no one realized yet, what Marcus knew with absolute certainty, was that the true evidence wasn't paper. It was patience. And patience, in the hands of the powerful, was never weakness. It was the calm before the storm. The air inside first class was no longer calm. It was charged, humming with disbelief, the kind of silence that isn't quiet at all, but alive with what people aren't saying out loud. Every passenger felt it. Something ugly was happening, and the room itself seemed to hold its breath. The younger attendant broke that silence. Her voice was sharp, triumphant, like someone trying to force victory before it was earned. Animals like you don't sit up here. The words didn't just echo, they detonated. Gasps shot through the cabin like sparks. The woman in the red scarf dropped her phone to her lap, stunned. The businessman in row 3 jerked upright, his face frozen. A mother in row 5 pulled her teenage son closer, shielding him from the ugliness but refusing to lower her phone. "Did she just?" someone whispered. "Oh my God, I got that on video," another muttered. She really said that out loud. The younger attendant's smirk flickered as she realized the room had turned against her. But she doubled down, because that's what arrogance does when it's cornered. Marcus didn't flinch. His face was still, his posture unshaken. But inside, the words struck deeper than the slap. They weren't new. They weren't original. They were the same refrain he had heard in boardrooms, hotels, restaurants, banks. The same venom, just repackaged. And yet, as old as the insult was, its sting hadn't dulled. It never did. The officer shifted uneasily. His authority was supposed to control the cabin, but now the energy was against him. Passengers weren't just whispering. They were objecting. A young man in row 4 stood halfway into the aisle, his phone raised. His voice cracked, but his conviction steadied it. "That's racist." Everyone heard it. Everyone saw her slap him. "This is assault." The officer barked back, "Sit down or I'll have you removed too." But the young man didn't sit. His camera lens stayed steady. No, not this time. The cabin gasped again, not at Marcus, but at the bravery of the kid who refused to be silent. Courage is contagious, and his defiance spread like fire. The businessman in row 3 rose next, his phone in hand, his voice firmer. "He hasn't done a damn thing wrong. You people tore his ticket. You called him names. We're all witnesses." A murmur of agreement swept the cabin. A woman whispered loudly enough for the row behind her to hear. "They're targeting him. You can tell." The younger attendant snapped, her face red. "This doesn't concern you. Stay in your seats." But no one listened. Phones hovered higher. People leaned into the aisle. The cabin had fractured, not into passengers and crew, but into oppressors and witnesses. The officer stepped closer to Marcus, his shadow covering him again. He reached down, his hand clamping around Marcus's arm. Gasps erupted. "You can't touch him," someone shouted. "That's assault," another cried. The grip was firm, insistent, meant to intimidate. But Marcus didn't move. He let the man's hand rest on his arm like a futile weight. His eyes stayed forward, calm as stone. "Remove your hand," Marcus said evenly, his voice low but carrying. "That's the last time I'll ask." But the officer didn't let go. He squeezed harder, tugging. The younger attendant sneered, thinking victory was near. And that was when the cabin broke. The young man in row 4 stepped fully into the aisle. "Stop it. Everyone can see what you're doing," the woman in the red scarf added, her voice trembling but loud. "This isn't procedure. This is abuse." The businessman crossed his arms. "If you drag him off, you'll drag all of us with him, because we're not sitting down quietly." The mother with her son whispered fiercely, "Stay behind me," while holding her phone steady at the crew. One by one, passengers shifted, stood, raised their cameras higher. They weren't just recording anymore, they were protesting. The officer faltered. He looked around at the sea of phones, at the witnesses leaning forward with fury. His grip loosened, not from Marcus's command, but from the weight of so many eyes judging him. For the first time, authority slipped from his posture. The younger attendant's bravado cracked. Her smirk faltered as she saw the passengers weren't silent jurors anymore. They were prosecutors, documenting her downfall in real time. The lead attendant tried to regain control, her voice snapping like a whip. "Everyone sit down. This is between us and this passenger." But her words fell flat. A college student's voice rang out, trembling but firm. "No, it's not just him. If you can do this to him, you can do it to any of us." The line landed heavy, undeniable. The murmurs grew louder, swelling into outrage. "Yeah," someone added from the back. "This is discrimination," another shouted. "We all saw what you did." The tide had turned. And through it all, Marcus remained still. His silence was no longer defensive. It was commanding. He had placed them on trial, without speaking more than a handful of words. The passengers had become his advocates, his defense, his witnesses. The officer finally released Marcus's arm, stepping back, his authority draining. Sweat beaded at his temple. He had entered the cabin with power, but now he looked like a man cornered, caught between his orders and the evidence surrounding him. The younger attendant's lips trembled. She glanced at the passengers, then at Marcus, realizing the net was closing. Her arrogance flickered into fear. "But still," she whispered under her breath, venom clinging to her tone. "First class isn't for frauds. It's for people who earned it, not for animals who sneak in." Phone shot higher, capturing every syllable. The businessman in row 3 turned fully into the aisle. His voice cut through the cabin. "Enough. We all heard it. You just ended your career." The murmurs became a roar of disapproval. Passengers shook their heads, muttered curses, raised their cameras higher. And still Marcus sat unmoved, because Marcus knew patience was more powerful than rage. And silence, his silence, was building a verdict no one could overturn. The balance of power had shifted. For the first time, it wasn't Marcus under judgment. It was them. The cabin was no longer simply divided. It was a battlefield of silence and whispers, of authority teetering on the edge of collapse. The crew stood rigid, their uniforms neat but their composure frayed. The passengers, once passive, now leaned forward in their seats, cameras raised, breaths held. And in the middle of it all, Marcus Reed sat still. The officer's hand had just left his arm, but the echo of that grip lingered in the minds of every witness. It wasn't restraint anymore. It was evidence. The lead attendant's voice cut the tension, sharp and trembling at the edges. "Sir, I'll say this one last time. Move to economy, or we'll have you removed from this aircraft." Her tone carried authority, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted toward the sea of phones pointed in her direction, toward the passengers whispering words like discrimination, racist, unbelievable. Marcus turned his head slowly, his gaze finally settling on her. He didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, his words were low, measured, deliberate. "You already scanned my pass." It cleared. A ripple of murmurs. A young woman in yellow called out from row 5, her voice trembling but steady. "He's telling the truth. I saw the screen go green. Stop lying." The lead attendant's head snapped toward her. "You're out of line. Sit down." But the young woman didn't lower her phone. "No, everyone here saw it. You're targeting him because of who he is." Gasps. Shifts. A businessman muttered, "She's right." The mother in row 5 shook her head, whispering to her son, "Remember this. Don't ever be silent." The officer stepped forward again, his voice hardening as he tried to claw back control. "Sir, last chance. Either you walk to the back or I'll drag you there." The younger attendant smirked again, emboldened by the officer's threat. "We warned you," she hissed, her tone dripping with contempt. "You should have stayed where you belong." Marcus adjusted his cufflink again, calm as ever. Then, without raising his voice, he delivered words that made the air itself feel heavier. "Touch me again, and this flight will never leave the ground." The silence that followed wasn't shocked anymore. It was bracing. Anticipation threaded through the cabin like static. Phones zoomed closer. The hum of the aircraft's engine seemed quieter than the weight of his voice. The officer faltered. He looked around, seeing not obedience but dozens of eyes glaring back. His authority had shrunk to nothing in the glow of camera lenses. And then Marcus moved. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket pocket and drew out his phone. Passengers leaned forward, breath caught in their throats. Was this the moment he called a lawyer? His family? The press? He pressed one button, lifted the phone to his ear, and spoke calmly into the line. "It's happening," he said evenly. "Cabin 3. Timestamp it. Begin escalation." The voice that answered was female, professional, and so calm it rattled the crew. "Understood, sir. Protocol is ready. Do you want preliminary alerts dispatched?" The words hung in the cabin, foreign to the crew but electrifying to the passengers. This wasn't a call for help. This was a command. The lead attendant blinked, her face paling. Who are you calling?" Marcus lowered the phone slightly, but his voice carried. "Someone who outranks you." Gasps rippled again. Passengers whispered furiously. "Did you hear that?" "Outranks them." "Who is this guy?" The officer's jaw tightened. He tried to recover, puffing his chest. "Enough games. Put that phone away." But his tone lacked conviction now. He sounded less like authority and more like someone trying to convince himself. The younger attendant scoffed, but her voice cracked slightly as she forced the words. "You're bluffing. You think this act will scare us." Marcus turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a calm that cut sharper than any insult. "I don't bluff." The passengers erupted in murmurs again. Phones captured the moment from every angle, zooming in on his face, on hers, on the officer shifting uneasily under the scrutiny of dozens of jurors. The lead attendant tried again, but her words faltered. "Why you're wasting your time. This is airline property. We make the rules in this cabin." Marcus lifted the phone back to his ear. His tone didn't rise, but each word was a blade. "Escalation approved. Flag this crew." "Confirmed, sir," the voice replied crisply. "Crew flagged. Shall I restrict credentials?" The officer's brow furrowed. He leaned in. "What does that mean?" Marcus didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed ahead, calm, unyielding. "It means," he said quietly, "that every word you've spoken is already documented. And when we land, you won't have clearance to set foot on this aircraft again." A collective gasp. The younger attendant's smirk vanished. She looked down at her badge as though expecting it to burn in her hands. The lead attendant's lips parted, searching for words. You can't do that," she stammered. "You don't have that kind of authority." Marcus lowered the phone into his lap, resting it lightly against his palm. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried to every corner of the cabin. "I don't need to raise my voice," he said, "because authority doesn't shout. It doesn't slap. It doesn't tear paper to prove itself." He paused. The silence pressed against the walls. Authority waits. It watches. And when the moment comes, it acts. The passengers sat stunned, phones trembling in their hands. They weren't just filming anymore. They were witnessing something irreversible. The officer's stance faltered. Sweat gleamed at his temple. His voice, when it came, was thin, stripped of certainty. "Sir, what exactly are you saying?" Marcus finally turned his head, his eyes sweeping the cabin, his presence filling the narrow space with quiet dominance. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. When he spoke, the words were steady as stone. "I'm saying," Marcus said, "you've just written your own verdict." The cabin went silent. Not shocked, not fearful, just waiting for the hammer to fall. The cabin was suffocating in silence. The lead attendant's voice had run dry. The officer's authority sagged like a uniform 2 sizes too big, and the younger attendant's bravado flickered weakly in her eyes. Phones hovered higher than ever, dozens of lenses capturing every bead of sweat, every twitch, every word. All of it was evidence. Marcus Reed sat still, his phone resting in his lap, his gaze calm but unyielding. He let the silence stretch, let it weigh on the crew until the air itself felt like judgment pressing down on them. Then, finally, he rose. The leather seat hissed as he stood. His movements were slow, deliberate, every gesture commanding. He didn't loom. He didn't need to. His presence filled the aisle without force. Passengers leaned forward instinctively. Some whispered. Some gasped. All were braced for what was coming. Marcus adjusted his cufflink one last time, then lifted his chin. His voice, when it came, wasn't raised. but it carried like thunder rolling through the cabin. "You call me an animal?" He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "On a plane I own." The atmosphere cracked. Gasps burst from every row. The woman in the red scarf covered her mouth with trembling hands. The businessman whispered, "Oh my God!" A college student nearly dropped his phone, whispering to his live stream. He owns the plane. He literally owns it. The crew froze. The younger attendant's face drained of color, her lips trembling as though she wanted to deny it, but couldn't. The lead attendant's composure shattered, her posture collapsing into disbelief. Even the officer, once so sure, stumbled back a step, eyes darting between Marcus and the recording phones. That can't be true," the officer muttered weakly. Marcus's gaze cut to him, sharp as a blade. "Look it up. Pull the roster of corporate officers. My name is on it. Marcus Reed, co-owner of this airline. The planes you fly, the uniforms you wear, the paychecks you collect, they pass through my signature before they reach you." Whispers rippled through the cabin. He's not bluffing. Holy hell, he's telling the truth. They tried to throw the owner off his own plane. The revelation detonated louder than the slap ever had. Marcus lifted his phone again. "Nia," he said calmly, "begin termination protocol. Effective immediately." The voice on the other end replied crisply, audible to those closest. "Understood, Mr. Reed. Please confirm which crew members." Passengers gasped again. Some clutched their chests. Others whispered frantically into their phones, narrating history as it unfolded. Marcus's gaze swept the aisle. His tone never wavered. Flight lead, cabin attendant, and officer. Lock their credentials. Revoke their access. The reaction was instantaneous. A sharp beep chirped from a younger attendant's lanyard. Her ID badge blinked red once, then went dark. She grabbed at it frantically, shaking it as though she could will it back to life. No, this isn't real. You can't." Another beep. The lead attendant's badge buzzed, its green light vanishing, replaced with the same lifeless red. The officer checked his device instinctively. His screen flashed access revoked. His jaw fell open. The cabin erupted. Gasps. Shouts. Passengers whispering. He actually did it. They're done. Right here, in front of us. Phone zoomed in on the badges. On the crew's faces draining of authority. The younger attendant's voice cracked. "Please, Mr. Reed, we didn't know." Marcus's eyes sharpened. His tone remained calm, merciless in its steadiness. "Ignorance is no defense. You had my ID. You had my ticket. You chose humiliation instead of service." The officer stammered, his voice hollow. I was following protocol." Marcus turned his gaze on him, heavy as stone. "No, you were following prejudice. And now, you'll follow unemployment." A murmur of agreement surged through the passengers. Some clapped softly. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The businessman in row 3 muttered, "Unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this." The young woman in yellow, still live streaming, whispered into her phone, "He just stripped them of their jobs. Right here. Right now." Marcus lowered his phone, resting it in his lap again. His voice carried to every corner of the cabin, quiet but undeniable. "Justice doesn't wait for closed doors in private meetings," he said evenly. "Sometimes it happens in the very place the injustice began." The applause began softly. A few hands clapping, hesitant. Then more. Row by row, the sound grew until the narrow cabin shook with thunderous approval. The crew flinched under the noise. Their uniforms suddenly looked hollow, their badges nothing more than dead plastic. They weren't attendants anymore. They weren't authority. They were passengers stripped of power. Marcus sat back down, calm as ever. The storm he had unleashed swirled around him, not within him. The applause eventually softened into silence, but the silence was different now. It wasn't tense. It wasn't hostile. It was reverent. The woman in the red scarf lowered her phone, her voice trembling. "You gave them every chance, and they buried themselves." Marcus's gaze flicked to her, softening just a fraction. Then he looked forward again, his voice lowered, intimate, but carried all the same. Some people mistake silence for weakness, he said. They mistake composure for submission. But silence isn't surrender. It's a test. He glanced at the scraps of his torn boarding pass, still scattered on the carpet. He bent down slowly, picked up a single fragment, and held it between his fingers. You can tear paper, Marcus said, but you can't tear the truth. A murmur of agreement swelled. A teenager whispered to his mother. He didn't even yell once. Phones captured the moment, recording the line already destined to go viral. Marcus dropped the scrap into the officer's open palm. The man flinched, staring at it like a verdict. That's your reminder, Marcus said softly. Every decision has a cost, and sometimes you pay it in public. The officer's shoulders sagged. The younger attendant's tears welled. The lead attendant pressed her trembling hands together, searching for words but finding none. But Marcus didn't look at them again. His silence had already sentenced them. The businessman broke the hush with a steady clap. Then another passenger joined. Soon the cabin was applauding again, louder, rolling like thunder. Phones shook as passengers clapped with one hand and filmed with the other. The crew shrank under sound, stripped of everything they thought made them untouchable. And Marcus Reed, calm, unshaken, sat back, hands folded in his lap. The storm finished. He didn't need to demand respect. He had claimed it, and the world would know. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.